Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
This episode is brought to you by Flow Sports and Flow Grappling, the streaming platform dedicated for fans of grappling, rugby, basketball, volleyball, swimming, cycling, and much more. If you're into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you'll want to head straight to Flow Grappling. They stream all the major events, IBJJF, ADCC, WNO, and the Pan Ams. And yes, even the IBJJF European Masters, where you could have watched me win gold. Tap the link in the show notes or go to podcastportugal.com to subscribe and get access to all the action. This is Justin West for Podcast Portugal. I want to extend a really warm welcome to part 2. We are very, very lucky today to get to have Freddy Silva come back and have a podcast with us. And he's here to talk about his new documentary, Megalith. It's something that I'm very fascinated about. There is over 1,000 megaliths that once stood in the French region of Brittany, and similar stones around central Portugal, in Scotland, in southern England. And it begs the question, why are all these remote sites chosen to build such huge stone structures? And who did this building? And what would be the possible reason to all that labor to move stones in those times? Freddy, I'll let you describe this in much better detail and much better way than I can. Very warm welcome to you.
No pressure. I was, I've been researching this for decades, and the more you walk out into the fields and collect stories and get scientific evidence, and you just leave it there for a while, and it began to dawn on me that the three biggest concentrations of megaliths on the planet, which are northern Scotland, the Bretagne region of France, and of course the region around Évora in Portugal, near where you are.
Yeah.
And why these three places above all others? And they seem to sort of coalesce around a similar period. They have very similar folkloric traditions, associations with fairies, which is a whole topic in itself. And believe me, I'm not making this up, and there's some science behind this. And also, it ties in with a migration that happened across Europe around 6000 BC when they had problems with climate change. And it forced people to find other places in Europe to move from around the Black Sea and the Armenian area across Europe. And they left a DNA fingerprint and a linguistic fingerprint, Évora being one of them. I had no idea that Évora in Armenian actually means two ways, depending on how you pronounce it. Either the existence of a grove of trees, which is possible, or the existence of fairies. I never will put that together. So this is why the documentary was important, to have something that's finally puts together all these bits and pieces, and it shows that there is a common story between these three different places, and that's why it took so long to put together.
Really interesting. And the big question for me is the size and the geometric patterns and the alignments of these stones begs the question, who were these people? How possibly did they move these stones? Often, like Stonehenge, for example, I'm assuming those stones were moved all the way from Wales, if I'm correct.
Original ones, yeah.
Yeah, all the way across Salisbury Plain. I don't know how many kilometers that is, but that is a huge undertaking for what we feel is possibly it's definitely an ancient civilization, but how technologically advanced they are is the big question. And why do that? Why spend so much effort when you should be gathering food, hunting, gathering, traveling, or I don't know if they were farming so early, but how did they have the time to do such crazy installations?
Exactly. Well, that's three questions.
Yeah. Sorry.
We'll start off with the who. The interesting thing is to go into folklore and mythology. Most people are just not aware that mythology is a wonderful theatrical device for recording important information. The problem is it was written at a time when the language and the communication was very different to ours, so the stories may seem a bit obtuse, abstract, and also fanciful. But when you sit there and be patient with it, it gives you huge amounts of information. And as we're discovering now in Australia with the Aboriginal cultures, their mythology actually describes meteoric events that occurred 1 million years ago, which means that someone had to be there to experience these impacts in the outback in order to memorialize the information. So I began to look at the traditions around Évora and Sintra in Portugal and Monsanto as well, which, by the way, happen to share the three major gravity anomalies. So you have these three areas of megaliths which are tied into mythology, which are tied into gravity, which we now know plays an important part and an important role in altered states of consciousness, which is why these three places became very spiritually important in Portugal to begin with. And the thing that ties them all together is a race of antediluvian people that they appeared on the coast of Portugal just after a major global impact event around 9,700 BC. And they were called the Ophusa, and they settled in Sintra, and specifically around just to the west of Lisbon, near Queluz, ironically where I was born. I began to sort of take an interest in them because the Romans picked up the story about 5,000 years later. And they said, it's funny, these people came from a sinking island in the middle of the Atlantic after a global deluge wiped out their homeland. And they have exactly the same story across the Atlantic in the Yucatan, in the Yucatan part of Mexico. And they call them the Canul, which means the people of the serpent. While in Portugal, the Ophusa literally means the people of the serpent. So we're talking about the same people. And if you overlap the two traditions across the Atlantic, they were very tall, about 8.5 feet tall, which is not unusual because we found the graves all over France and in Britain. They're called giants' graves for a good reason. And these people were different to us. They were very light skinned. They were described as blonde or redhead with green or blue eyes. And they were teachers. They would set up these megalithic structures and they'd basically wander off into the hinterlands and basically teach hunter-gatherers how to farm, how to fish, and how to grow the accoutrements of civilization, like reading, writing, mathematics, astrology, and astronomy, and so forth. And the same story appears in France, and the same story appears in northern Scotland, albeit later. They seem to be moving north as we go. And the point was that the one thing that connects them all is that they had complete control over the laws of nature. And that's a direct quote. And I hear that in India as well, a description. They also appeared there. They were called the Anu Naga, the people of the serpent. And they knew the laws of nature, how to bend the rules, which brings us to the second question. Well, how do they move the rocks? The one thing that became obvious to me after about 10 years of looking at rocks was that every single one of these things, and again, linking this to Portugal and your particular region, if you go to the Menhir of Meada, which is not far from, is it Montserrat? Yes, it is.
Yep.
It's Montserrat. And it's about 5,000 BC or thereabouts. It's the tallest megalith, tallest menhir in the Iberian Peninsula, and it's orientated to the first rising of Orion over the mountain of Montserrat in 5,000 BC. So that gives you a pretty accurate date. But all of these stones, they didn't come locally. They had to be dragged anywhere between 10 to 40 miles. In the case of Egypt, they were dragged for 400 miles. And you think, why? And you start looking at the same thing in France. The biggest menhirs there, which I had a lot of picture taken of me standing next to it, and it's the menhir of Keloas. It's 31 feet tall. That's about, 13 meters, I believe, or thereabouts. And there's another 2 meters below the ground, and the top had been chopped off by a lightning strike. So it was probably closer to about 16 meters. This thing is ridiculous, and I'm 2 meters tall, and I look like a little fly next to it. And this thing was dragged for over 15 miles. And you think, well, what the hell? What were they thinking? Not exactly an easy thing to do. And they all have one thing in common. It's the chemistry of the stone, and it's packed with a certain type of quartz, which is highly piezoelectric, which means it's sensitive to electrical current. And the way you get electrical current out of this quartz is that you either put it under pressure, as you will do if you stack the rocks one on top of each other, such as all the passage mounds, and the other one is if you put them in places where the gravitational pull of the Earth is a bit different, and also the fault lines that upon which they stand are in a constant state of vibration. So you have Evra, Sintra, you have Bretagne, and also northern Scotland, and all of these megaliths all sit on the most fractured zones of those particular regions. So the Earth literally is vibrating every single day. Most of the time, it's imperceptible to us. You don't sort of sense earthquakes until you hit a 3.0, but they are in a constant state of slight vibration, and that's all you need to transfer the friction to the quartz, and the quartz remembers the frequency and it sets off an electrical current. So you have these massive amounts of megaliths, in Brittany especially, over 80,000 surviving megaliths, and that may be a fifth of what was there originally. So you're in the middle of this electrical current, and if you touch these things at the wrong time at the wrong place, as I know, you will get one hell of an electric shock, and you won't feel your forearm for 10 minutes. Most dowsers are very aware of this. So you're basically walking into this electromagnetic field. So the next question, which is the third part of this this question, is why? Well, that was the biggest problem, finding out why would you go to this enormous exercise to create a big electrical field for what purpose? Well, the first obvious one, if you link it to climate change, is that they needed to grow crops. And in Portugal, in France, and in northern Scotland, you have the same tradition among farming people that whenever you plant anywhere near these big megaliths, especially if they stand in the middle of a field by themselves, the crops within the vicinity of the stones are growing much better and quicker and taller. So there's something that has a fertilizing quality on the quality of the crops around them. Again, it's just an observation by farmers, but farmers have the best acumen when it comes to observing things because their observation means that they're either going to survive the winter or they're not. So you trust that observation. But then in comes an electrical engineer in France called Pierre Méreau, who back in the 60s, as a skeptic, went around measuring these stones. And again, he's an inquiring mind. He's not really for or against anything. He just wants to know if New Agers really have a point when they're hugging the stones, because people talk about healing properties and having altered states of awareness. And to kind of long story short, he said, yes, it's absolutely true. And it's the design of the megalith that defines its purpose. So the big menhirs act like big coils. The energy is drawn to the stone and it accumulates in the stone and it discharges and recharges about every 80 minutes. And there's a big electrical field about 36 feet in circumference around the actual stone, a bit like its aura, if you want to call it that. And it's absolutely measurable by modern equipment. And then the stone circles behave like big batteries, and the dolmens behave like accumulators. So there's a real technology here at work. And again, it is to do with agriculture, but it's also to do with altered states of consciousness, because these things, especially the passage mounds, were well known and have a very rich tradition of people going in there, spending a goodly time, usually having taken a narcotic or a poison, and they leave the body in a prescribed way, and they go journeying into the other world for about 3 days, and then they exit, and they're much more aware of the big picture of the universe. Now, that's one hell of a good reason to build these monuments, where you walk around the earth alive. You really understand the meaning of what it is to be a soul walking the earth in a physical body. It means you have control of your manifestation process. Your dream states are much more acute. You can predict the future to a certain degree, and you can also be involved in the healing process of your body. But more often than not, is the fact that you understand the nature of the universe the nature of the soul, which means that you have a very good degree of control over the way that you live your life. In other words, you can manifest a world around you to a certain degree that makes your time here very valuable. And we see traces of this in the Greek and the Egyptian and the Indian mystery schools, where they did exactly the same thing. So we're getting pretty close now to understanding the nature of these sites. And I'm just scratching the surface here because, we haven't even touched the astrological alignments and the astronomical alignments as well. And they're all referencing not just the sun and the moon. And you can do this with sticks. You don't need massive 50-ton rocks to tell you what the sun and the moon are going to do for the rest of the year. You can save yourself a lot of trouble. You can just use some large sticks or some tree trunks to do the same thing. So there's much more we still don't know, but these three things definitely are now on our radar.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. And these people, how they were sensitive to these electromagnetic fields in the first place. I mean, how did they go and choose the rocks? How did they find out about all these things? And how did they have a different type of sensitivity, do you think, to the that we've possibly lost now because we're so surrounded by so much charged particles, I guess you could call it, in the environment around us? I mean, do you think in those times they were more sensitive to this?
Oh, absolutely, because your survival relied on your ability to connect with your environment. If you don't know that by looking at the buds on a tree in March, you won't know that there's an early winter coming. And I lived in England when I was writing my first book in Wiltshire, which is the least populated part of one of the most populous islands on the planet. And I used to make friends with the farmers, walk around with them, and they'd sit there observing the way the trees bud in the spring, and they'd be correct that it's going to be an early and severe winter. Even the way that animals behave. And again, that's the one thing that you hear around the world, that these people, what we call the gods, had control of the laws of nature because they could understand nature, they could sense it, they could see the invisible currents that flow around the landscape, which now takes very expensive equipment to locate. And I remember a press release by NASA back in 2008, I think it was, and they talk about how they now are able to locate the Earth's telluric currents that behave like serpents, which is why these gods were called the serpent people, because of the way they were able to understand the currents. Yeah, and that's something that Aboriginal people understand too, by the way. And they call them the Jalkidi, the dreaming tracks in Australia. It's the same thing. So your survival depends on it. And the more we have walked away from nature, which really started around 1500 BC when we had major problems with solar flares and massive fires that raged the earth. It essentially brought down the Bronze Age in the Mediterranean. And from then on, we have a warring culture and a possessive culture, which we're still in. And slowly we're weaning ourselves out of. And it's going to be a very difficult divorce, as you can see by the political machinations that are going around the world right now. The old guard who wants things to be done the old way. Politics is a very black and white thing. People are arguing about the most trivial of things right now, all because we understand, our bodies understand there's a big change going on in the world right now. We need to evolve if we're going to survive. And I do think we will get to a point where we'll recover this ability to feel the environment around us and, save ourselves from ourselves, to quote the Hopi prophecy. So we do understand how these things work. We just forget about them. We rely on technology these days to tell us what the weather's going to be like. And then we're surprised there's a big heat wave on our doorstep when just by looking at the way the clouds move and the way that the water and the surface tension of the sea happens to work, that next week is going to be bloody uncomfortable. I just did a workshop in Atlanta, Georgia, teaching people about this. And I said, there's a very simple way that you can actually find out if you're much more mindful of the environment around you. You don't need to travel to a megalith. You don't need to travel to a passage mound or a dolmen unless you really want to, which I do recommend because it does put things into perspective. But you can actually sit here and if I ask you, do you consider yourself to be mindful? And a whole bunch of people put their hands up, and I thought, really? And you can see this doubt suddenly appear on the audience's face. And I said, okay, if you think you're so mindful, can you write down 10 sounds that you heard before you entered this room? And they couldn't get past two. And I said, right, go during the break, go outside, go for a walk, come back 15 minutes later, and be aware of everything that you hear. And we did it, and we came back into the room. I said, well, can you name me 10 sounds that you heard in the last 15 minutes? And they're down to like 10, 15 sounds. Even someone hearing the ice falling to a glass goblet about, 50 yards away. Yeah, you become much more sensitive to your environment. And that's just a simple technique. And I do this, I used to do it every day. And now for me, it's second nature. I become so sensitive to the world around me, and I can tell you what the time is without having a watch for the last 25 years. I can almost hear people's thoughts, but that's not because I'm special. It's just because I've developed my God-given ability to feel the world around me.
To
At
concentrate.
some point when I'm not thinking about things, I can actually predict what's going to be happening for the next month and even the next year within a certain reason. So anybody can do this. And after a while, if you practice this simple technique, you can actually train your vision to notice things when you go for a walk. So I'm very acutely aware of everything around me and behind me all the time because that's what I do. That's the kind of work I'm involved with. And I take that ability to the sacred sites to find out why they were built, who built them, and try and put this into either a book or a documentary in this case. That's where my work begins, sensing the people who were responsible for this, and of course then doing the hard work and going to libraries and doing the measuring and the science behind it, which of course takes a year or two to figure out. So it's within anybody's grasp, and I definitely suggest everybody should try this.
It makes a lot of sense, actually. If you look at it in, like you said, in practical terms, if crops grow better around these sites, then it stands to reason that building these sites would give the people there, whoever built them, a degree of power. And if they also have the knowledge and the sensitivity to understand and forecast to some degree what the next growing season is going to be like, or if it's going to be a short spring or a long winter, and they can also tell exactly when the summer equinox is, or May Day, or whatever, it gives them a degree of power. And that seems to be a similar thing that happens in all of human history. That knowledge becomes powerful, used for nefarious reasons, or also used for philanthropic reasons. So it stands to reason. It seems to make a lot of practical sense, actually.
Yeah, if you're looking from the practical point of view, where they had to grow crops when the climate was changing, then work backwards from that, it makes absolute sense. I heard a lot of stories in the Alentejo region where people are still, by and large in small towns aware of what's going on. And I remember my grandparents, when I was living in Estremoz with them, back when I was a wee nipper. My accent doesn't give my actual place of birth away very well. It was one of my most cherished, in fact, probably my happiest childhood memory, spending a year with them in the middle of nowhere, and literally in the middle of nowhere, with two of the poorest people you'll ever meet. No water, no electricity, no bathroom. I'll spare you the details. But I learned so much about the land, just observing how my grandfather and my grandmother could, who were illiterate, by the way, and penniless, they could sense everything around them, and they understood. They could see right through people. They had that ability to perceive the rhythm of people, even though they're a quarter of a mile away. My grandmother would look at the shimmering image walking down the train track, and she'd go, "There's nothing good's going to come of this." And she'd be right. There'll be a shyster trying to sell her, a refrigerator when she didn't even have electricity. So again, it's about the acumen of survival. But what fascinates me is that how they took it a stage further, and they applied it to access the other world, where your soul literally leaves the body in a prescribed environment, and then you come back with all kinds of information from this astral reference library, and you apply it. And you're absolutely right. At some point, there was a priesthood who then figured that this might be a good idea to control people, because as we lost that ability to understand what these places were for, then you have religion creeping in and taking over as the middleman. And that we have the problems we have today with organized religion. They're not letting you talk to God because, we are an expression of the creator anyway. There is no difference between us and the central Godhead. This is something that's been created by organized religion, that you have to talk to a specialist to talk to God. Well, we're all creations of the creator. We are connected by these invisible tentacles back to the source. You can connect to the source whenever you want. Even me sitting here, I could just sit here quietly having a nice cup of tea and go, "Oh, I think I'll just connect back with the source and see what's happening. Check in with the originator or the creator, whatever you want to call the source." And, and you come back an hour later from this wonderful reverie, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. And you learn something new about the universe, and then you apply it in your daily life, or not, or you teach it, or you tell someone else about it. And that's how we always have maintained our civilizations in balance for thousands of years, where right now we can barely hang on to a civilization for 2 decades before everything falls apart. And exactly for that reason, we've forgotten our connection to the natural environment, to the earth, and how the earth is connected to something even greater than that. So again, they built this using big stones to remind us of this connection. That's sort of an aha moment that I had after looking at these enormous megaliths and going, why the scale? It's so ridiculous. It's impressive and it makes fantastic photography. But I think it's so over the top, unless, of course, they could see into the future and they could see that we in the 21st century would lose the plots totally. So now we see a bigger attraction of people going to these sites, and sometimes just for trivial purposes like taking selfies and things, which is really annoying. But at the same time, there are people who go there and they get it. Something is downloaded at these sites, and it transforms them. And you only need a third of the population to be influenced by these sites to wake them up. So many people go to these places around Evra, for example, and even in Monsanto and Sintra, and they go, yeah, there's something here that I can't rationalize, but it's changed who I am. And they're absolutely right, because your subconscious is searching and yearning for that connection. And this is where it is. These people mark these places on the land so we would recognize who we are and what we're doing here for our own benefit. So that's a huge leap of imagination for them to take that responsibility and say, no, we're going to leave the citizens of the earth with these self-help centers, as I call them, because when they forget who they are and what they're doing here, we've marked the locations where wonderful stuff happens, and if you interact with them, then you're in control. Nobody else is in control of you.
Oh, and I'm definitely going to visit one of these sites now with a new approach. I'll leave the phone in the car and walk there. I think is probably a good idea from some other place, so you start to build up that sensitivity as you arrive there. That's a nice idea. You've given me an idea of something to do for sure. I mean, is there any research, or is there any sort of plausible ideas of how they physically and practically moved these stones?
Yes, there is, and in all of all the places you could think of, it's in Princeton University in southern New Jersey in America. And back in the 80s, there was a group of people, scientists, and their job was to find out that fine line between science and mysticism. So give them credit. They actually decided to be given some funding and go off and play and find out what happens when you get to sacred places, and are sacred places different to other places, to normal sites around the world. And what they found was, yes, these places behave very, very differently. I remember this experiment that they did at Matotepila, which is called Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Terrible name. And they did the medicine man ceremony, and they designed a computer to measure the inclusion of human intention and consciousness when it interacts with the local environment. So you can actually measure the inclusion of consciousness and intention
Wow.
anywhere you go. So it marked a spike in the machine. So they did the same medicine man ceremony in a car park, and they found nothing happened. So they thought, okay, there's something going on here. And then they went off to Egypt and they took a portable version of the machine around. And the lead scientist walked around in respectful silence in Luxor, in Karnak, in the pyramids, and I believe Saqqara as well. And he was amazed that the reaction picked up by the machine showed the results were higher than a group of meditating monks. That is extraordinary.
Hmm.
But then, when they did group meditations at these sacred places, the readings were the highest they've ever been. So, ergo, the whole point was that when you take these specially designed temples and megaliths and you put people in there in a certain state of reverence, the energy combined of the two creates an expanded field of awareness which can be read by a computer. That is incredible.
It's fascinating.
So now we know that these places are alive. And people like Pierre Méraud as well, that showed very graphically that yes, every 18 minutes, these megaliths do attract energy, they build it up, and then they release it. Dowsers have known this for thousands of years. You can go there with a couple of bent coat hangers and find out for yourself. And if you're a pretty good dowser, you can get some very detailed information about the site. And this has been also highly documented in scientific terms by measuring dowsers or linking the dowsers and their reactions to a local computer. And they recognize that just before the dowsing equipment registers an actual event, like they usually cross or they move, that something happens in the human body which is picked up by a computer. So your body's already picked it up in your nervous system. It gets registered, and the signal goes to the dowsing equipment. So there's a lot of information already done on this, not just hearsay, but scientific information. And I published a lot of this in the Missing Lands, and also much earlier in the Divine Blueprint, which is, I think, it's now 12 years old, and it's still sort of going like hotcakes. So there's a lot of information that I've compiled over the years to, bring the skeptics more into the center, to give them permission to believe that there's something going on here and that it was worth investigating. And then when you get laughed at this stuff and being away with the fairies at dinner, then you can actually shower people at the dinner table with science, and you'll be invited back for dinner.
Well, I read somewhere, which was really fascinating to me, that the gravitational pull of the Earth is not constant on the surface. And that really fascinated me. If you can look, you can actually Google it and look on the Earth's gravitational pull, and look for the it's called the bowl in the Indian Ocean, and it's something to do with the core of the Earth being irregular, and there was, I think it's more of a dense iron core is slightly towards the underneath the Indian Ocean, so creates a stronger gravitational pull, which is more so the actual ocean bowls into that gravitational force. So
That's right.
it seems to make sense that there would be other areas on the Earth with similar things, with something creating a stronger gravitational energy or force underneath the particular surface.
Which is interesting because the one of the original islands where the gods used to live. And by the way, a god is basically any person that understands the rules of nature. So anybody can be a god. I'm not talking about invisible people with big, long, white beards. And that's not what it's about. That's a Christian misconception. The original island of the gods, one of the 8 of them, actually is in the Indian Ocean. It's now underwater, and it's they describe the whole thing on the walls of the Temple of Edfu in Egypt. So there's something going on there that they understood about gravity as well. But again, it goes back to what I was saying, that the biggest concentrations of megaliths on the planet just happen to coincide with gravitational anomalies. And now we have neurosurgeons looking at this and the influence of electromagnetism and the weak gravitational field and its effects on human consciousness and its ability to influence the human body and the mind. So science is now beginning to finally come round 13,000 years after the event to what the ancient people were telling you, that there are some places on the earth where the laws of physics as we know them behave very, very differently.
Ditch the plastic and the toxins. Mother's Earth dishwasher papers are made from non-toxic, eco-certified materials, so they're safer for your home, your health, your family, and the planet. No bulky plastic bottles, no waste, just clean dishes, shipped anywhere in Europe, and 3 times cheaper than those toxic tabs. you buy in the supermarkets. Click the link in the show notes to start saving. So Freddie, how much evidence have you found? Sort of any evidence that megaliths and structures are also in the Americas? I know that there is a lot of new theories now on the migration of the early peoples of the Americas, and we did talk that there was a possibility to the race of people were also. Did you? I can't pronounce the word. Ossery. Yeah. Do they came from possibly from the middle of the Atlantic, but also is there evidence that they could have also come from the Americas or South America, or is there some kind of links with megaliths and the Americas, or not?
Yeah, in Central America, there's quite a lot of evidence to back this up. The Canul, which were the people that lived in the middle of the Atlantic, excuse me, very hot here today, finally. The Canul were these magician priests that lived in Atoll, where we get the word Atlantic and Atlantis from. And they arrive on the Yucatan Peninsula in 9600 BC. It's a very firm date listed in their written traditions. And they basically were trying to rebuild their former world, which, to cut a very long story short, in about 2004, there were sonar images that came back off the northwestern coast of Cuba on a fracture zone that showed an entire city about 2,000 feet below sea level, which looks exactly like the megalithic and the temple cities in the Yucatan and Guatemala. I mean, it looks exactly like what you see today. And that report and all of its images were bought by National Geographic pending further investigation. And that was the last you heard of that investigation. It went completely underground. I can't even locate the original people that did it or the ship. Nothing. It's been completely suppressed. And for good reason, because then you'd have to explain how there's a city with megalithic structures, temples, roads, and buildings exist 2,000 feet below the sea level. And the answer is that the whole thing collapsed in one go, in one fracture zone, around 9,700 BC, when the Earth was consumed by a wall of water, many tsunami caused by the hitting of meteorites exactly where you don't want them to hit, which is the deepest parts of the ocean. And the story gets picked up by the Maya, who saw these people arriving, the survivors arriving from the last of the Atlantic islands as the sea level was rising so quickly. And they arrive on the coast in 9,600 BC. They built the biggest pyramid in that part of the world that hardly anyone knows about. I think I must be the only person that takes a group of people to Izamal to see this enormous pyramid. And there's only a third of it left after the Spanish came by and took down the building, took all its stones away, and built the city that now surrounds the pyramid. That's how enormous this thing is. And there's 6 others, by the way, other pyramids. So from there, they went around building what today we know the places that we love so well, like Chichen Itza. Their name was the Itz. That was their correct name. And they also built Uxmal. And then they went into further away from the coast, which I don't blame them after experiencing massive tidal waves. You get as far away from the ocean as possible. And you see their handiwork at Tikal and El Mirador and the other big temple cities that now LiDAR is beginning to uncover in the middle of the whole of Central America.
That's fascinating.
In North America, you don't get it as much because the native people hardly ever built anything. Like I said at the beginning of the program, we sensed things. We didn't have to build anything. We sensed where things were. And most Native American tribes never or hardly ever built anything. They could sense where the hotspots of energy were. So for them to build large structures was irrelevant and pointless. They could just go there, stand on these hotspots, and get the tingly winglies, as I call it. But now we're also discovering that as we're going into the Amazon, we're discovering other structures as well. That's still now a sort of a research in progress. Again, thanks to LiDAR and other Earth-penetrating radar techniques, we begin to discover that there's all kinds of civilizations hiding in the middle of the jungle. But as soon as you go up to the Andes in South America, you've got exactly the same story. And if you go to Tiwanaku on or what used to be the outskirts of Lake Titicaca, because that lake keeps receding decade after decade, that's one of the largest inland oceans, and it's still slightly salty. And the local traditions, again, talk of gods that built Tiwanaku around 15,000 BC. That's how old that place is. And it literally means that the city of my shining people. And the local Ayamara, who are one of the oldest people on earth, they have traditions of the lands they came from the Pacific, and they came here long before the flood. They helped the gods build these cities, and they still live. S- s- um, s- uh, Sometimes when it gets really hot, Justin, it's really hard to think.
I understand.
I can't have the air conditioning in the room for obvious
Yeah, yeah.
reasons.
I've turned my fan off
Their
as well.
successors, their successors now live on they're the Uro people, which basically is the name of the gods of South America. It's the Urukeu, the red-headed giant people, who, incredibly enough, said, well, they were linked to the Egyptians. And when they said this, and I said, you've got to be joking me. Are you telling me that the Egyptian gods were up here at 13,000 feet altitude on Lake Titicaca? I said, oh, yeah, they were great seafarers. And they'll say it matter of fact. And I said, well, does that mean, so you're telling me that Tiwanaku, the Aku syllable in Tiwanaku, that is an Aymara word? I said, no, it's not. I said, oh, but it's an Egyptian word. I said, really? And they were totally surprised by this. I said, well, it means shining people. That's the Aku Shemsu Hora, or to put the full phrase, shining ones, followers of Horus. Those are the gods, as they were called in Egypt, that also lived in the middle of the Indian Ocean, whose islands sank during the global catastrophe. So these people were connected to the Urukeu in South America, who also had megalithic building construction techniques and all the accoutrements of knowledge and civilization. And they came from a place somewhere between Easter Island and South America called Kainga Nui Nui or Lapukije, depending on who you talk to, depending which tribe you talk to. So the same story picks up in South America as you find in Central America, as you find in Portugal, as you find in France, as you find in Scotland. And it just keeps moving across space and time over about 3,000 years. So obviously this was a slow movement of people, which you can understand because the world has been decimated. I mean, it wasn't the fact that there was more water than there is now. It's just the fact that there was huge tsunamis going on everywhere, which traveled inland for miles. I have stories from Tibet and Nepal that said, yeah, the tidal waves crossed the Himalaya, and those are 3 miles high. And I looked at the ballistics report at Los Alamos laboratory because the U.S. Army was actually conducting ballistics experiments to find out if a half a mile wide piece of space rock hits, let's say, one of the deepest trenches on the planet, which is off the coast of Peru. And they recreated it in a laboratory in a scale model, and they found out that yes, that hit would create a plume of water 3 miles high, which would be enough to cross not just the Himalaya but also the Andes, because the locals talk about the waters coming off the coast of the Pacific and literally running through the Andes, thrusting mountains up in the blink of an eye, and also destroying mountains in the blink of an eye. And they were climbing as high as they could, as fast as they could, and the water just kept coming towards them. And it's suspected that's one of the reasons why Lake Titicaca is still salty. It was the inclusion of salt water, because it's the same story with the Great Salt Lake in North America. The local tribes talk about the tidal waves coming across the Cascades and the Rockies, and it turns out that the salt in the Great Salt Lake is sea salt, not local salt. And that only appeared about 9,700 BC, which is the date of the actual event. And then I published all of this in the book called The Missing Lands, and its accompanying video called The Missing Gods, because there's so much juicy information. And it really started with the talking to local people, people whose ancestors were there to witness the events, and they survived, incredibly enough. So you start off with the myth, the folklore, rather than from European scientists and academics, because they're so far away from the events. I figured, well, if all things being equal, if these ancestors were there at the time of the event, surely they must know something more than we do. So I worked backwards from that point of view and found that now we have the science catching up with the traditions, the folklore, and the mythology, and it's all coming true. So it makes for a very interesting piece of work, and it took me about 6 years to research and put it all together. So yeah, it's finally all published and on paper.
Nice. Yeah, it's just endless amounts of fascination with these ancient peoples, and there is so much more stuff because there's people like you that do the research and they look into these things, and you ask the questions, or you at least pose the possibilities, and science has to address these questions, and that's what I find really fascinating. I don't think there would be those discoveries by LiDAR in South America if it wasn't for researchers like you, literally asking the question, have we identified all of the ancient, places on Earth, and is the Amazon jungle, is it been sort of grown by humans? Has it been tended by humans, or is it fully natural? That was something that I was reading about the other day, which I thought was really fascinating. How human beings have actually kind of used the Amazon as a garden, and sort of planted fruits and nuts and things, and encouraged certain growth of certain things which they could eat. It would make sense because then these structures would have a food source, because you can't have these big civilizations without the food.
Exactly. Yeah, there's another scientist that actually did looked into that. Again, asking the local people and asking these questions and saying, well, why would they build these enormous pyramids in Mesoamerica? And it turns out that the platforms were used not for ceremonies originally, but they were used to put grain. And the natural electromagnetism of the local landscape would be attracted to the shape of the building. It will go up the staircases, and then it would impregnate an electrical signal into the actual seeds. And from that, they were able to get 5 crops, where most people would get 2 or 3 for the whole year. So that's how they maintained their civilizations going, because they understood how to use, again, the laws of nature to do what nature does best, and then just get out of the way. And they even developed this gizmo where you could actually take this into any farm and say, right, you want to get a better yield from your seeds, put your seeds into this machine, and they've been selling it for the last 30 years with incredible results. So again, you just have to get out of the way, and you see a lot of resistance. Archaeologists, especially, are exceptionally resistant to all of this, and they'll call us, pseudo-scientists. And I said, well, we're not even scientists; we're just curious people, or pseudo-historians.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, but you know what? It's all being proved true. It may take a decade, and it usually takes someone from the inside to actually come up with this information, write a paper, for which they'll have their lives destroyed by the rest of the archaeological movement. And then years later, a decade later, they'll be proven to be correct. And there's this whole sort of infighting among the academic world about maintaining the status quo with their lovely ivory towers, with their wonderful theories, which were good up to a point. But now that we have more information coming out, we have to change the theory. And if the theory doesn't work with the evidence, you have to get rid of the theory or change the theory. And this is why the archaeological people are going after people like me. I mean, they're even writing bogus reviews on Amazon about books they haven't even read, for God's sake. I laugh about one of them, about my book on Scotland's sacred places, where there's an archaeologist describing my book as complete nonsense. And she says, I'm a real archaeologist. Buy our books because we know what we're doing. Well, if she'd bothered to read the 800 references that I use to back up my work, most of them are from archaeologists.
Not from her books,
so but not from her
that would
books,
have been
obviously.
too much of a coincidence. Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, clearly, she hadn't read the whole book, obviously. But and I just laugh at this because we just keep moving forward. The Portuguese have a very good saying. It's called the dogs bark, but the caravan keeps moving
Yeah,
forward.
yeah.
And it's absolutely true. And I think the independent people, I'll call myself an independent historian, are doing better work because we're not encumbered by grants from universities, or we have to push forward a certain agenda. We keep an open mind, and with that open mind, I can draw from any source of information. I can talk to climatologists, meteorologists. I can talk to genealogists, language people, people who look at the ocean. I talk to everybody, and I look down at my table. I go, "Wow, I've got 15 baskets of information to draw from," and I just sit back and go, "Wait a minute, all this stuff actually connects in one way or another." And that's how you do it. Whereas most of these whining academics, as I call them, or the quackademics, to quote the late John Anthony West, they're very narrow-minded. In most cases, they don't even talk to geologists, and they're actually working with geology, with things which are buried in the ground. Makes no sense to me. So the idea is that you ask the locals, you ask people who were closer to the events than we were, and then work your way backwards. And you don't even need to make stuff up because this stuff just writes itself.
Yeah, I'm sure society and academia will look back on what we call modern archaeology right now, and they'll just be bashing their heads going, why did you touch these ancient sites? Why did you dig them all up and extract the bones and the bodies and the burial things and move them to universities? You should have just left them there so that we could,
Exactly. And now we don't have the alignments. We don't know what they were aligned to. I'll give you a classic example. There was a 16-year-old school kid up in Montreal, I believe, about 5 years ago, who using Google Earth was looking at the alignment of temples to Orion, which is a very big thing with megaliths. I mean, it's, on one level, it's acknowledging the gods and where they originally came from, and I'm talking literally here. So many cultures talk about the god originally coming from Orion, and in certain cases, they talk about this is the origin of human beings, either hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago. We don't know how long that was. And it turns out that there is this acknowledgement all around the world with Orion all over the place. And this kid took it upon himself to look at the temples in Central America, especially around Yucatan and Guatemala. And he said, you know what? If you take these things which have common points to them, and there should be one big temple here in the middle of the jungle, but it's missing. And I can't believe that the archaeologists took this kid apart. I mean, if anything, at least give him credit that he tried and he did some work, and he wanted to expand his understanding. You encourage young people to go forward. They may not get it right all the time, but at least they're looking, and that's worth encouraging. So they trashed him, and guess what? 2 years later, there's a LiDAR that showed in the specific site where one curious academic decided to go and take a look, and they found this massive temple city under the tree canopy. So now the kid was absolutely correct. This is how these people work. They should be ashamed of themselves, really.
Yeah, I mean, there is one thing like sort of, their responsibility, and it's their criteria almost to try to prove these theories incorrect or correct, and they should be impartial when they approach us. Otherwise, they're already if they're already got a sort of an idea that it's not correct, they're going to try to prove that it's not correct in terms of and not really sort of keeping an open mind and looking where the evidence falls. I think that's important.
And I mean, they consider themselves to be the guardians of history or ancient history. I'm sorry, there is no such thing as guardians of ancient history. We're all looking into the garbage piles of history to find out what the hell happened. I mean, I'm lucky if I'm 50% correct at any given moment, and I will admit that, because I too am looking and rummaging through piles of dirt, looking for clues, and that's what you're doing. You're putting together a kind of a crime scene, if you like, and hoping that you're getting close to the truth. The only people that know the truth were the people that were directly involved with the actual event. We're hoping to get close, but the more evidence you have and the more things you can draw from, the better your chances that you will be close to the truth. And that's called science. That's how you work. And you keep evolving the theory. You keep changing things. Sometimes things just don't work out the way you do, and you move along. That's the way you should be doing. So I don't think anybody has a monopoly on ancient history. I certainly don't, and I've got 9 books and 15 documentaries to back up my work, and it's all carefully noted. You can go and check where I got the information from. You don't have to believe a word I say. And even I'm still questioning all of this stuff. I still think I just don't know everything. I mean, I can say, yeah, megaliths. I know at least 3 reasons why they were put there, and I can prove it. But I think, and I sense that there's other reasons why they were built and why they use big stones too. These are the 3 that I can be sure of. There's another 2 that I can say, yeah, I can, 50-50. They were also used to do this and that. And after that, I'm just going, well, now I'm just speculating. And that's where I'm going to leave it until the next time I walk out into a field, sit there, look at it and go, now what's this all about? And then, I'll get an image, or I'll get, fairies talking in my ear. And then I'll go and dig up this information that I just received from this invisible universe, sit in the library, and I go, well, bloody hell, it's absolutely true. It's all there. And that's how it works. You just keep moving forward and keep asking questions.
Yeah, there's 2 things to pick out of that. Is that in the span of 8,000 years as well, there could actually be multiple uses, because, say, after 400 years, it's very possible that the original ideas might have been forgotten and a whole bunch of new ideas created. And then another 400 years into that 8,000 years, a whole nother usage of these stones will take on. So we've got a whole collection of multiple uses. And that might have differed very much from the original use or the original intention.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
And you get this a lot with, it's usually when you get archaeologists away from the media, and you sit down, have a nice pint of beer in a pub. They can be really nice people, and we just chit chat. And you say, let's take the Alentejo region and its megaliths. And I said, well, why do you call all of these places burial sites? Oh, because we found a kneecap in one dolmen, so therefore all of them, all 5,000 dolmens had to be burial sites. I said, really? Do you know that only 15% of all these excavated sites actually yielded any human remains? And then usually nothing more than a kneecap or something. Sometimes you get some ashes or something. And if you're able to do carbon dating, the bones tend to be a hell of a lot younger than the actual site itself. So the site could be 5,000 BC, which a lot of them are, and yet the human remains are like 1,500 BC, which tells you that during that time, the use of the site changed a lot. It was the same thing in France. I mean, they found out that only 8% of any sites around the region of Karnak, which is the biggest concentration of megaliths on the planet, had any kind of human remains, and then they were interred posthumously. There's the Saint Michel tumulus, which had side chambers where people were actually buried in about 4 to 3,000 BC. But then they opened up the main chamber, and there was something very uncomfortable. They found a very old wooden box with soil which contained parts of a skeleton, and the skeleton and the carbon-14 of the wood and the soil in which the skeleton was buried was 8,000 BC, which completely rewrites the whole history of the entire mound. And around it, no one else is buried anywhere else. So depending on the orientation of the site, which is a very important thing, it would be used for different purposes altogether. No, but it's absolutely true. I know that when I was living in London, there was this very nice shishi hotel around the corner where I lived. And if you didn't know any better, you think, oh, this is a really nice sort of hotel design in the old style. No one knew that it was actually built as a hospital during the First World War to house people coming over from the Battle of the Somme. And before that, there used to be some kind of ancient monument under it, which gave the name to the local location as a kind of mound where the sun god used to penetrate every winter solstice. So now you have the same location used for 3 different reasons over, 8,000 years? And this is the one thing that's important to keep track of, that things do change their purpose over
It would
time.
just make a lot of sense, if you were living sort of 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and you you're living in the local village there, maybe you would just decide, okay, I'm going to start to bury my granddad or my grandfather. I'm going to bury him up there because he always loved to go up there. He loved that site. He got an energy from there. And then that might spark
Yes,
off a tradition that would last for 800 years. To then say that
I
these are burial sites for everywhere and they follow the same pattern, and also use that to carbon date the site seems to me a little bit crazy.
Yeah, and if you look at the what they call the Anta de Zambujeiro, which is a massive, massive, probably the biggest passage mound in the whole of the Iberian Peninsula, and it's just to the west of Évora, and it's still there. You still have the earth covering it, and they dug up all of these little amulets, a few necklaces, and a few trinkets, but they never found any bones in there, and yet it's a burial chamber. If you look at the tradition of these enormous man-made hills with these passage mounds, with stones which are over 22 feet tall, by the way, they're simply huge. Excuse me. You can trace them back all the way to Siberia, to the Kurgans of the Caucasus region and the Armenian highlands, many of them which still exist in the Ukraine, by the way, and I still hope they do. And I looked into the origins because this is part of the tradition of people that migrated to Portugal, to France, and Scotland. They have exactly the same methodology. And in the local traditions, they're originally built as places of honoring the tribe, a place of council, and a place where the wisdom keepers used to gather. And it depended on the orientation of the mound relative to a rising star, a constellation, or the moon. So you have to understand the folkloric association with these objects in the sky. And they would be used for a couple of thousand years. And as the structures grew in size because they would put additional material on top of them. In other words, there were great big dirt piles which then grew and grew and grew with dirt. But after a while, the orientation and the alignment of the mound went awry because the Earth, relative to the horizon, keeps moving every 72 years. So once the alignment of the temple is no longer in alignment with the object with which it's supposed to commemorate, they would basically seal the mound and often they would put a very important person, a wisdom keeper or someone of note inside the mound, and then they would seal it and then go and build another one. So again, they use it for a place of, as a law mound, a place of law giving, of issuing instructions, laws or information. Some were used for initiation. They would find these gold cups laced with narcotics, where people used to spend a goodly time leaving the body and going away in the other world and coming back. And then other ones, finally, when their time was up, they would be sealed with someone important inside them. And that's the last thing we see. So the first thing that the archaeologists do when they find these, 15% of sites with anyone buried in them, that's the last time that they were used, and they were sealed up forever.
Mm.
But that was just to commemorate the site as a place of importance. But before that, for many thousands of years, they were used for something completely different. So I am amazed that this tradition survived all the way across Europe and ended up in the western part of Europe.
Yeah, I mean that does make a lot of sense because humans are pragmatic. If there's a structure, they'll use it over a degree of time, and yeah, for whatever they want, for however they want to use it.
Yeah.
They might have even stored grain in there or anything. Anything's possible, right? Over that length of time.
One of my favorites is just north of Évora, and I won't tell anyone where it is because I am very protective of it. And it's also on private land, and I know the farmer, he usually lets me just go in there because I've been going there since, God knows, for decades. It's a place that I just like being away with the fairies. It's so quiet on top of a hill. And the cows usually come up and join me, which is kind of funny because when you open your eyes, you're surrounded by all these cows looking at you. And it's magical, but only about 20 years ago, it was actually used as a sheep pen.
Yeah, yeah.
And you go up to the top, and you have these wooden slats at the entrance to these enormous stones passage. And you look in, and it's like, bah.
Yeah. That's a great example.
Yep, it's been used as a sheep
Yeah.
pen, and they've taken it out now because the government said, "Well, you can't really do that. We really should take better care of it." But the cows like going up to it. They like hanging out near it, and they use it as a scratching post. But they're very docile. It's like they got the big horns, of course. and I don't feel at all threatened. And they come here to look at me, filming or just meditating, and they're very curious. They'll stand right next to me without annoying me, and we're very happy. It's though they sense that there's something still there, and there is. If you go there and take sensitive equipment, the site is still
Mm.
active. There's still a measurable energy field, and the cattle, who are much more sensitive than we are, they pick up on this. And sometimes when they're having difficulty trying to give birth, the cow would actually go near the site, go around in a big spiral, and then lie down, and then it gives
Hmm.
birth. So they understand that there's a healing quality that's beneficial to them.
Yeah, make a lot of sense. Yeah, and going actually back a little bit to our archaeological friends, and there is one thing that I find really great in the work that all of this research is creating is the inspiration, because the inspiration of these stories to youngsters is going to get them involved in archaeology. It's going to get them involved in researching and looking at
I hope
these
so.
sites. And there's going to be 4 or 5 geniuses that are going to come out of that generation who are going to take us forward with our understanding. And I think,
Yeah, reaching the younger generation is the most important thing. A lot of people that come on my tours to these sites, they tend to be much older because they can
mm,
afford it. But whenever I see anyone under 30, it's like I give them special attention and special time because, yeah, they're the ones that are going to be taking this information forward and hopefully applying it and save our, our, our doomed culture from falling apart within the next decade, which it's right on track for achieving unless we change course dramatically. So, yeah, kudos to them. And I have met people who are very unusual. There was one young kid, I think he was Chinese. He was living in LA, works in the computer industry, and he was not from this planet. I mean, that he doesn't function on a daily level. I mean, he shows up in Wiltshire. We're going to go to the stone circles of Avebury and Stonehenge. And he shows up in the middle of winter wearing a T-shirt and a pair of shorts, and I thought, "You're gonna die in about 5 minutes, mate." So I figured, that's my free time at lunchtime gone. I gotta take him shopping to be sensible because he's from LA. He's never seen cold before, and but you see, and he just behaves differently, and we're looking at him going, "Yeah, he's not local. His brain is wired in a very different way." And I said, "You watch him one day. This trip will do something to him with the connection with these stones because he's asking unusual questions, but the right
mm,
questions." And I'm sort of also on my back foot, going, "Well, I never hadn't considered that before." Well, let's think about this over lunchtime. Let's discuss this because that's something that's been on my mind. And you can see the wheels turning in his head, and I said, "One day, this kid's picture is gonna be on the cover of Time magazine or something like that, or Wired magazine, and he'll say, I went to see these stones, on this trip with this guy, and it changed my life, and it helped me create this," and it'll be some major evolution in technology, and I'm keeping track of it.
yeah.
I'm keeping track of him. Those are the people I like to pay special attention to because they're the ones that are really gonna move things forward because they don't belong, in the what we call the ordinary world, to which I don't really belong to either. My best friends tend to be upright stones, oddly enough. They never let me down.
And they're always around.
You know what
And
I
they're
mean?
always around.
And they're always around, and I trust them, I don't take them for granted, and they've never, ever let me
Yeah.
down. Now, like many people in my
Mm.
life, not all of them, but, it's the way things are. As one friend of mine once said, "It's just humans being."
Yeah.
And he's absolutely true.
Yeah. I mean, Freddie, I almost consider you the original AI because you are very much sort of a collator of information, and you put forward a premise of what's going on. And I'm excited to see in this future of AI uh, being able to analyze all of these symbols and analyze language and linguistics and common words and collate all of this information and come up with some new theories. I mean, do you think that there's a role to play for AI and this kind of thing?
Oh, I think there's always a role to play with any new technology. Otherwise, we never had the light bulb or the wheel. But again, humans being humans, 50% of them will use it for right action, and then the other idiots will basically use it for wrong action. And you're really seeing the abuse of AI right from the get-go. Like you said, yes, we can help it to decipher language, and we're making huge strides in that. That's fantastic. And then you got people who are making up strange videos of, popular politicians look like they're completely drunk, so you don't vote for them, and you end up voting for the wrong people. So it's the way that history has always been with humans. You bring up something really interesting. Some will use it for right action, some will use it for wrong action. And the trick is discernment. So you have to use discernment and be very grounded to understand the difference between right and wrong. And hopefully, and my hope is that people will wake up and use things for right action where the majority will benefit, even though sometimes it may make life a little uncomfortable for you and your vested interests. I've had conversations with people over dinner where we'll talk about politics, and I said, well, I voted for this and that. I said, yeah, but that's against your vested interest. I said, yeah, it might be in the short run, but not in the long run, because the great amount of people will benefit, and only good things can come from that. And I don't mind sacrificing a bit of discomfort for the short run if it means that in the end my life will be better because everybody else around me is benefiting from something. Surely we can all, we don't have to be on an upward trajectory all the time. Sometimes you have to go backward a little bit. Sometimes you have to stay where you are in order to move forward. You can't keep going forward all the time because it's impossible. There's nothing in nature that says that you have to keep moving forward all the time. Sometimes you have to sit there and wait. Like right now, I've been telling people that I really want to get to New Zealand. I don't have $5 million to invest, and I don't have a girlfriend there anymore. So I'm just having to wait because the time is not right, and I'd have to be patient, which for me is absolute hell. Because I'll say one thing: I am far from the most patient person on the planet. But it's something that I have to improve. But that's the point. Sometimes you just have to do things that, you have to sacrifice a little bit to see the bigger picture. So I hope that people will take that on board and act accordingly.
I'm sure they will. And Freddie, I think what we definitely need to take from this is we should encourage more people, respectfully, to go and get stoned, to go and sit underneath these stones and think about their lives, take a little bit of time and reconnect. And I think that is a beautiful message that we can leave.
Visit the sacred places, visit the ancient sites, because they were put there as an insurance policy for you and for me. And they went through a lot of trouble to do this. So the least we could do is honor them by visiting these places. And I can tell you that the fringe benefits are amazing. Don't go there expecting anything. It'll come from your own mind if it does. But if you go there expecting nothing and just be, you'll be amazed what comes back from the not the woodwork, from the stonework.
Beautiful. I think that's a beautiful message to finish on there, Freddie. And once again, I'm so appreciative to you and your time. Such a fascinating talk. Or every time we talk about anything, it's always amazing. And I'll leave a note in the show notes. But where is the best place that people can, just to new listeners, they can be reminded of where they can research and find some of your books and the new Megalith documentary? Where is it out? Where can you get everything Freddy Silva, all the information?
You go to invisibletemple.com.
Invisibletemple.com. And I will leave that in the show notes, listeners. Freddie,
lovely.
Thank you so much.
And I'm going to be in Evora in September.
Brilliant.
So if I get a bit of free, I'll let you know, and you can drive up and buy me a beer.
I certainly will. I'll look forward to it.
Actually, wine.
We'll go sit.
The local wine.
Yeah, we'll go sit. Well, actually, I have a good friend up there who has a Casarelva, a nice big winery, so we can go visit him.
Well,
Freddie,
we call it research in the trade.
We'll go sit next to a stone as well. I think that would be very nice. Freddie.
Oh, I'm sure that'll be difficult to do.
Freddie, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Welcome. This is Justin West from Podcast Portugal. Over and out. Simple, secure currency transfers from once-in-a-lifetime property purchase of your dreams to everyday expenses. Currencies Direct helps you save time and money on international transfers. Rated excellent on Trustpilot with over 17,000 positive reviews, Spend like a local with their multi-currency MasterCard. Tap the link in the show notes to get started.
Stop playing Baldur's Gate 3. 1, 2, 3, we're living on a rock, living on a rock, living on a roller coaster. 365 per year, living on around in a muffin shop. Call it, I need to concentrate, stop this train of thoughts, or I will be crashing on a couch. Won't have much to grouch about.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.